As beloved as it is feared, the Tomb of Horrors has been re-envisioned in every edition of Dungeons & Dragons, in one way or another, and no matter how much the rules of the game have changed, the tomb remains infuriatingly difficult and crazy lethal. Over the decades, almost everything about Dungeons & Dragons has changed. Yet, at the heart of the game, it has always been about risk and reward. Players can choose when to take a risk and roll the dice. If you have some cards up your sleeve, or frankly, you get lucky, then there's treasure in it for you. Yet, the infamous Tomb of Horrors were completely opposite to this mentality. There is no luck, no skill, and amazingly, no rewards. Exploration plays a huge role in D&D, and the Tomb of Horrors punishes you for it. One of the early features of the Tomb of Horrors is the face of the Great Green Devil. It's an enormous relief of a devil prominently displayed on a wall, with a gaping mouth that's completely dark inside. No light, no nothing, but a sphere of perfect blackness. It's a mystery that just begs to be investigated. Maybe you throw a rock in. Maybe you poke it with a stick. Maybe you try to touch it. Well, congratulations. You can kiss that rock, stick, and arm goodbye because you have just met one of the most sadistic traps in the tomb, as the mouth isn't just a sphere of darkness, it's a sphere of annihilation. Initially appearing in the first edition of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons in the original 1979 Dungeon Master's Guide, the Sphere of Annihilation was described as a black globe of nothingness, of which anything that came into contact with it would be completely and irrevocably destroyed. The sphere was later discovered/retconned into being a void in the fabric of the multiverse, essentially a black hole that remains motionless unless acted upon by a mental push from a sentient being. Still, it kept the horror of annihilating whatever it touched. While those with a strong will or possession of a certain artifact could move the sphere, thankfully there was no evidence that these void death balls had any intelligence or awareness, let alone the ability to move under its own power. But what if it did? The deadly spheres, the assassins of the elder gods, the black balls. Let's talk about the Umbral Blot. So, what are we going to be covering today? In this episode, first we're going to talk about what an Umbral Blot is. Next, we're going to dive into its origins or try to figure out its possible origins. After that, we'll explore how I rebuilt the Umbral Blot for the 2024 edition of Dungeons & Dragons and how they can fare in combat. We'll close out with some ideas on how to add the Umbral Blot not only as a monster of the week, but as part of an ongoing campaign. While the name Umbral Blot came to us from the 3rd edition Epic Level Handbook, the creature itself is much, much older. Going back through the ages of D&D, the Umbral Blot is pretty much the Black Ball, a critter from basic D&D. Specifically, the Black Ball came to us with the book AD&D 2nd edition Mystara Monstrous Compendium Appendix. Similar to the Monsters of Faerun, the appendix is set in the D&D world of Mystara, but all the entries are fairly setting neutral. It's full of really weird monsters, and I think the Black Ball, or the Umbral Blot, is the poster child of that. For my dive into the creature, I'm going to be focusing on the Umbral Blot aspects, but the Black Ball certainly will not be forgotten. Even more mysterious than the spheres of annihilation that they resemble, there isn't much in the way of history of the blots. The entry for these creatures itself isn't sure where they came from either. However, there are plenty of theories to explore as we dive into what we do know about these black orbs of doom. Alright, so we know 2 things about Umbral Blots. 1, that they were created, and 2, that they destroy. First, Umbral Blots are known to be constructs. Constructs are a type of monster that are basically artificially created monsters, usually by a powerful spellcaster or entity. For example, golems are common constructs that can be found throughout the worlds of D&D, built and given life by wizards or other spellcasters. However, the power level of an Umbral Blot certainly surpasses the might of a mere mortal spellcaster, as they are described as a hovering sphere of absolute void with a monstrous challenge rating of 20. Second, a hole in reality that erases the existence of all they touch. That's why blots are mistaken for spheres of annihilation, since they are featureless black orbs to mortal eyes that look exactly like the spheres. In fact, if the blot didn't move, would anyone recognize it as quote-unquote alive, or lack of a better way of describing it? And those two things are all we know directly. However, as I said, while the Umbral Blot originates in 3rd edition, its first incarnation, the Black Ball, can be found in AD&D 2nd edition, with a few more juicy hints about the entity's background. Back in 2nd edition, the Black Ball was a mysterious orb creature, and scholars in the D&D worlds weren't even sure if creature was the right way of describing them. One of the reasons being is that no one knows precisely how this creature came into existence. However, those same scholars have theories that we can explore. The first theory presented to us is that the Black Balls are prisons for powerful fiends, transformed prior for breaking some rule and then being made into the orb. The term fiend covers both devil and demon in D&D, and I could see it being a punishment for either of them. For devils who are all about order, being turned into pure destruction would probably get in the way of their planning and backstabbing while still being useful to their superiors. Despite being the incarnation of chaos and destruction, demons I could see still being imprisoned in the orb as a form of punishment, first taking their freedom away, as well as any destruction that they are doing being a little bit too neat, and frankly too orderly for the demon to be able to stomach. However, the Black Balls and the Umbral Blots are both neutral in alignment, so I can't see a fiend being at the core of it. The second theory offered is that an unknown race created this creature to transport its victims to another plane of existence. Basically, instead of being a black hole, these blots are wormholes for those that are more scientifically inclined. A hypothetical tunnel connecting two disparate points in the space-time continuum, or maybe across multiverses. An extreme form of body snatcher. To me, this theory fails because the Umbral Blot makes a poor kidnapper. It's pretty clear to scholars that the Umbral Blots, whatever they touch, is obviously disintegrated. In the drawings of the Umbral Blot, it leaves perfect holes in whatever it touches. Holes in walls, or holes in the ground, or holes in people. So if it moves through a person, but it's high enough that it's not able to completely envelop the feet of the person, the feet stay behind, and the body goes away. I can't imagine an unknown race that would create a body snatcher that would leave parts of the body behind. Third, and most popular theory, is that the Black Balls are created by the Old Ones, basically powerful gods that surpass any of the current deities. Interestingly, with the Umbral Blot, is that one of the common theories is that the Umbral Blots were created by old gods to be messengers and even assassins. Even more interestingly, the Umbral Blots were credited with the downfall of their creator gods, destroying them completely. It's this third theory that I find the most interesting, so let's dive in and try to figure out who these old ones were that created the Umbral Blots. The Umbral Blot monster entry notes a few things about their creators. First, that it was the Old Ones, gods that came before the gods of today who created them. 2. The Old Ones created the Umbral Blots to be messengers and sometimes assassins. Kind of like angels for the more traditional gods, but we'll get back to that. And then third, the Umbral Blots are also known as the assassins of the Elder Gods, having destroyed their creators and hunting down any that may have escaped. The term Old Ones isn't a term used in D&D lore in any consistent way. Elder Gods or Old Ones is used referring to either powerful far realm entities or distant original creator gods of the Great Wheel or the other types of universes. The Umbral Blot doesn't strike me as something from the far realm. They're far too stable and too logical to come from that mad realm. Also, far less tentacles. The original creators of the Great Wheel, the creators of the multiverse, include the inner and outer planes. That seems a better fit for the Umbral Blot. The Umbral Blots, they seem more fundamentally part of existence, more primordial. Diving a little bit into D&D history, lore history here. The creation of how the Great Wheel and the multiverse in general was created, and by whom and why, and all that sort of good questions, is largely unknown. Many cultures believe that a god or a pantheon of gods created the multiverse. One such god is A, who is the overgod of the Forgotten Realms. A is not the proper way of pronouncing his name. For whatever reason, I just can't get it to come through my mouth the proper way, so I'm just going to stick with A. If you are interested in looking him up yourself, it is spelled A-O. Anyway, A created the multiverse from the raw materials, and from this multiverse, he created a lot of worlds. These worlds contained no life, but they were coveted by powerful beings who rose from the elemental chaos, known as primordials. The primordials are basically elemental gods. They are beings that are made manifest of the elemental energies. Now, I bring up primordials when discussing the Umbral Blots for one specific reason. The primordial known as entropy. Also known as the Great Nothing and the Swallower of Gods, entropy was imprisoned by A in the form of a sphere of annihilation. Now, I think we found a link here, or at least a thread to follow. Weirdly enough, entropy cannot be the creator of the Umbral Blots because entropy is technically still alive. It's still imprisoned. Also, it's just one being when we're looking for a group of creator gods. So we're looking for something similar to entropy, but a pantheon of entities. When I think of where a pantheon of entropy-like entities could exist, I don't think the material plane. It's not on the material plane. On the other hand, the inner planes are the manifestation of certain aspects of reality, usually physical and energy, such as fire and water. The inner planes include not just the four major elemental planes, but also the two energy planes, positive and negative energy. And when I think of entropy, the concept of entropy, I think negative energy. In D&D, negative energy is associated with evil and death. It's the quote-unquote life force of undead. Interestingly, and important for the Umbral Blot, negative energy unmakes things, such as when it uses inflicting style magic. Negative energy also is often described as manifesting as black, crackling surges of power. Now, I will admit, it's not a perfect match at first glance, but like how fire can both warm and burn flesh, I think there's a spectrum of negative energy that we can play with. Very specifically, I'm talking about Voidstone. Like all inner planes, the negative energy plane isn't just a ball of pure negative energy, but it's an actual world with landscapes and quote-unquote life that is colored by negative energy. Voidstone is a mineral of sorts that is formed naturally on the negative energy plane that, fun facts, destroys anything it touches. Completely black and featureless, any material touching Voidstone is quickly destroyed in a matter of seconds. It should not come as any surprise that there's speculation that Voidstone is considered the basis for the creation of spheres of annihilation because of the similar destructive nature and the utterly black appearance. Voidstone could also, in theory, be the basis for the Umbral Blots, who once again are constructs, which would tie the creature to the negative energy plane. However, there's a problem here because traditionally, negative energy planes are extremely hostile to all forms of life. The only form of life that can come there is undead, typically. So why this is a problem is that the gods of D&D, for the most part, need worshippers for their continued existence as well as having power. No worshippers, these gods could weaken until they no longer exist. Even if that's not the case, gods typically don't exist in the middle of nowhere with no one around, and I can't imagine the old ones would as well. For the most part, only outsiders from other planes make their way to the negative energy plane. Virtually all undead with a few brave necromancers. Undead typically aren't great worshippers, nor are necromancers. However, I said for the most part, because there's one race that claim the negative energy plane as home. The Zegi. I'm going to apologize for pronouncing them this way, as I should apologize for most things I try to pronounce in D&D, but I'm going to keep with calling them the Zegi. Originally from 1st edition, S4, The Lost Caverns of Trostjank. This is another thing I'm going to apologize for. I can't figure out how to pronounce it. I've tried several times. I can't just quite get it. So I have it on the screen if you want to check out that adventure. Anyway, the Zegi are a type of energon native to the negative energy plane. The concept of energon is from 3rd edition, in which energons are sentient energy that has coalesced into a form of life. There are positive and negative energons. The Zegi are the negative energons. I consider energons kind of like elementals. The Zegi are sentient, yes, with alien minds, but they appear to be highly intelligent. Similar to creatures of the far realms, the Zegi can definitely think and reason. They just don't have the same thought patterns that most mortals do, since they come from a place so bizarre and, for the lack of a better term, alien than the material planes. The Zegi appear to be explorers of sorts, observing other creatures even though they don't actually communicate with them. They're known to explore the rest of the planes too, especially with places associated with death, which seems fitting. And despite how virtually all other creatures infused with negative energy behave, like zombies or vampires, the Zegi are docile. Yes, they will defend themselves, as most life will, and sometimes they're observed to attack anything that they encounter in the negative energy plane, but even these attacks can probably be attributed to curiosity more than malice. Which is really strange, because negative energy creatures that have negative energy in them, like, once again, zombies, vampires, basically anything undead, you think of those creatures as inherently hostile to life. Nearly all other negative energy given life, undead, like I said, they tend to go after the living one way or another. The Zegi don't. If anything, they actually seem hostile to other creatures of negative energy. Their negative energy lash can be altered enough by the Zegi to avoid healing undead target. Undead typically are healed by negative energy, but their attacks, the Zegi can have their attacks not actually heal them. They can even rebuke undead, which is weird because you think they would be like on board with the undead being both negative energy. And here's a fun fact. The Zegi's alignment is neutral. A lot like an Umbral Blot. My idea of who the old ones were is that they were the gods of the Zegi, and they hated their worshippers. Typically, gods are the embodiment of their domains, and the old ones, in this case, were the embodiment of negative energy, from death to entropy to undead, and kind of everything in between. I also don't think it's too much of a stretch to call them evil gods. Now, the Zegi were their only real source of worship on the negative energy plane, since they were the only native life. I don't see how the old ones were happy about this. The Zegi aren't evil, and just like to watch life, and are in fact hostile towards unlife. They were also alive. Yeah, a weird version of life, but alive nonetheless. How can gods of entropy be happy to have worshippers that were alive? Gods don't have to have pleasant relationships with their followers after all, so I can't imagine this scenario was. And that's where the Umbral Blots came in. The Blots were created to be messengers and sometimes assassins of the Old Ones. What else in creation, all of creation, fits this bill? Angels. Angels of the more traditional gods. Gods need direct servants after all. It would be antithetical to the Old Ones to create new life, but making constructs out of void stone, I think, is something they would 100% do. So why did I bring up the Zegi and talk so much about them as I did, since this is a focus on the Umbral Blots? The Umbral Blots need a reason to kill their gods, and I see the Zegi as that reason. This is where everything kind of ties together. The Umbral Blots are noted to be messengers of the Old Ones. Now, so disgusted were the Old Ones at the Zegi, the Old Ones would send any of their demands, communications, prayers, divine interventions via the Umbral Blots. The Umbral Blots are not mindless automatons. They probably function with that same alien mindset that the Zegi do. They think and they can reason, which means they can change. They probably spent so much time with the Zegi that they grew to be more like the Zegi. Perhaps that's why their alignment shifted to neutral after being presumably evil like their creators. The Blots sympathized and empathized with the Zegi getting abused by their gods until the Blots finally had enough. Wanting to protect the Zegi, the Umbral Blots utterly destroyed their creators to the point where their names are gone, and to this day, the Blots still roam the plains in case one of them escaped. That's my theory, at least where the Umbral Blots came from and why they are what they are in the modern D&D. But how good are Blots at killing gods? Pretty good, as it turns out. At a challenge rating of 20, the Umbral Blot is nothing to be trifled with. First off, being constructs, they have a boatload of immunities to many conditions and resistances to many damage types. My personal favorite is the fact they have damage immunity to force. No magic missile, no disintegrate. In fact, overall, the Umbral Blot is just going to be a nightmare for any spellcaster thanks to their magic resistance and the fact that they're just so slippery. Thanks to being made messengers and needing to get anywhere and everywhere, cornering or trapping an Umbral Blot is going to be near impossible thanks to its innate spellcasting, allowing it to dimension door around the battlefield, teleport across the plane, or plane shift to another plane entirely. And all of these are at will. Even better, the Umbral Blot can shift into the ethereal plane as a bonus action. As a cherry on top, the Blots have the Vortex action, which on a failed dex save means a creature within 30 feet of the Blot is yanked off their feet and pulled straight line until they are adjacent to the Blot. All that together means if the Umbral Blot wants to get to or get away from somebody, they can. And you do not want them to come to you. The Umbral Blot is defined by two of its traits, annihilation and void form. The Blot's annihilation trait is exactly what happens when an object touches Sphere of Annihilation. It's annihilated. Oh, and if you touch the Blot, you take a ton of force damage. As for the pesky living things, the Blot's void form lets it share the same space as another creature. A creature whose space the Blot enters has to make a Constitution saving throw. If they make it, they get out of the way. If they fail, the Blot enters their space and they take a ton of force damage. These are two traits. They're not actions, they just happen. To keep going with the horrific things that it can do, the Blot's Disintegrating Touch is an attack that deals, as you might guess, a ton of force damage. It gets worse. Remember that vortex that I was telling you about? That it just pulls creatures right next to it? Yep. But that's talking about combat. An Umbral Blot fight is more like trying to kill a storm than a monster. Thankfully, this storm at least has hit points. In combat, and most importantly, the Umbral Blot wants you dead, first it's going to drag as many people as possible close to it. With so many new friends, it's going to silently float about the battlefield entering as many creature spaces as possible, dealing nearly unresistible damage to them, and then slapping one of them with force damage for good measure. Won't that provoke a lot of attacks of opportunity, you ask? Go ahead, attack with your sword, dagger, fist, or claw, and let me know how that works out for you. Running away or trying to keep your distance? Good luck there. I hope you have enough spell slots and tricks to lose the blot as it tries to follow you right after you do, until all you have left are cantrips and a wooden staff you got at first level. The only saving grace is that the blot has no divination spells to track you. What they do have is all of eternity too. All of this while just silently floating towards you until it can touch you and then you no longer exist. It's like the Terminator in the form of a black ball, seemingly unstoppable and relentless, absolutely terrifying as an encounter. I really hope you can negotiate with it instead. As for storytelling options, I think with the raw power of the Umbral Blot and its CR, I think a lot of the encounters are going to be more like hazards or environmental effects. You're trying to withstand it or survive it, not kill it. My first idea, storytelling-wise, is anywhere you would slip in a Sphere of Annihilation, swap that out for an Umbral Blot. That could make for player characters questioning their life decisions when they try to control the sphere, and then the sphere decides it wants none of their BS. Given the high CR, keeping the blot not hostile to the players is probably ideal. Perhaps they find an Umbral Blot asleep and it's mistaken for a sphere, and then they try to move it. Their methods wake it up, and then the blot realizes it has things to do, and with the player so far beneath its notice, the blot moves through, chewing through a world until it disappears. Just a bit of a scare, or maybe that's actually the way to get further into the dungeon. On a more active front, perhaps the characters discovered that they need to kill a god, like you do. Who better to turn to than a group that had previously killed their own creator gods? The problem is trying to find one, talking to one, and trying to convince a blot of the righteousness of their cause. We could even flip the script here. What if an Umbral Blot is trying to kill your god or an important figure to the players? The Umbral Blot doesn't have divination, so their targets can hide, but if the Umbral Blot finds them, it'll be pretty quick. The players could then be tasked with stopping the Umbral Blot, which is darn near impossible in a straight-up fight, which means they have to find another way. Perhaps they could talk to the blot and find out why, agreeing to a task for the blot in exchange for stopping, or might even agree to help the blot when they find out the reason the blot's hunting that thing down. Perhaps they could lay a trap using methods to stop teleportation and then find a permanent way to restrain the blot. Fun fact, restrain is a condition it's not immune to, along with grappling, but that one seems a little bit more risky. Another story idea could be to use the blots as a natural disaster, perhaps even a repeating one. Say every 1,000 years or so, the Umbral Blots appear and decimate civilization. Not to kill everyone, but to bring it to ruin, and the game takes place right before, during, or after one of these purges. Why are they doing this? The kingdom could be unknowingly or knowingly holding one of the remaining old ones, perhaps sleeping away, and the Umbral Blots are there to make sure that the old one doesn't gain enough power to awaken. Perhaps enough worshippers might awaken it, or maybe the amount of magic the civilization is using grows so much that might cause it to awaken. Another reason could be that the kingdom's expansion is unknowingly threatening a safe community of Zegi, and the Blots kill off their own creator gods, so what's a civilization or two to them to protect the Zegi? When it comes to eldritch abominations without pseudopods or extra arms, the Umbral Blots are second to none. When it comes to natural disasters, the Umbral Blot are second to none. When it comes to deep lore characters, I spent a long time trying to find connections about where they came from. The Umbral Blot are second to none. There is something utterly terrifying about a quiet black orb that just unmakes everything it passes through. but still thinks for itself. And I think that's just neat. And I hope you do too. In the video description, I have a link to a monster block for the Umbral Blot that has been updated to 2024 edition of Dungeons & Dragons, ready for you to unleash upon your unexpecting players. Channel update, the Umbral Blot was one of the first choices I had when starting up this channel. That natural disaster story idea actually comes from a game I was in, the Umbral Blots repeatedly destroying nations that grew too powerful. Now in that game, it was because they were trying to stop a god of magic from being released, which we ended up being able to do. And then I became a bear god, but that's another story. As this is our first video, I'm happy to hear any feedback you have on how they're being received. As we are a growing channel, if you found this interesting, please leave a like and subscribe for our future videos. It really does mean the world. Let me thank all of you for your time and wishing you all the best until we meet again with our next monster.